Welcome, friends. Another double bill this week in the second episode of our Tales of the Weird series. Two more again from the late Jonathan Bowden. The first explores the supernatural history of a Scottish castle, while the second tale explores the exploits of a green-fingered psychopath. I hope you enjoy them. I'm Christian Bravery, and you are listening to Savage Bites. So let's get into our first story. But before we do, real quick, if I could just ask you to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, just so you get notified when I upload a new video. Okay, on with the first story, which is entitled Bis Diet, a non-fiction. A castle in Scotland with over 1,000 years on the clock boasts more ghosts than you can shake a stick at. The fiefdom in question was Glamis, and Shakespeare set Macbeth there, together with an overview and much commentary from Sir Walter Scott. Ancestrally, the seat has been a furlough of various British monarchs, and is at present, at the time of writing, one of Elizabeth II's births. Her sister, the late Princess Margaret, was born there. Earl Strathmore, the Queen's cousin, has been in residence, and is believed to have spied the Grey Lady, a female apparition of the upper air. When chided by the press, Strathmore refuses to think about anything bordering on exorcism. The castle, like all others of its type, has a secret chamber or ventricle. One of the major stories involving this oubliette lies with the Earl of Crawford, an inveterate gambler during the reign of James II. He was passionately addicted to gambling, and on one Saturday night he insisted on carousing with the cards into the neighbouring Sunday. The other bravos refused, but Crawford dared the devil himself to come and play lots with him, since he intended to conjure with the cards straight through early mass and beyond. A roll of thunder, accompanied by lightning, split the heavens, and Lord Bis appeared, so the credulous believe, to gamble endlessly in the secret chamber over Lord Alistair Lindsay's, Crawford's, soul. All of it can turn on the roll of a dice or the spin of the ace of diamonds. Another hoary legend deals with Lady Jane Glamis, widow of the 6th Thane of Glamis, James V. She was condemned for witchcraft, membership of a dark or heathen circle, and even having designs on the monarch's life. Burnt alive at the gibbet, a resident, and not in healing, of the secret room where she boiled up her potions. Lady Jane's screams merge and meld in with others in the darksome cube, a punishment block if ever there was one. Other infractions include the Ogilvy clan, back in feudal days, who were starved to death by enemies in that very example of the Stark Museum, like one in Soho, London, dedicated to memorialising torture. There is no end to such deceit. Further Glamis apparitions stalk the chapel, its cloisters, walls, windows and ledges, none of them witness to the light that shines alone. A nameless warrior, possibly from the Highlands, and dressed in full armour, is often met in a dusty corridor, yet Glamis survives as a traditionalist relic, and an exemplum of the old Scotland, which has been uncorrupted by modernity. It remains a place where the living dead might linger without fear of molestation. Well, there you are, a little essay, if you will, exploring some stories of hauntings of Scottish castle. So, kind of interesting. Okay, our second story from Mr. Bowden today is entitled Venus Flytrap, a short story. Characters in the drama. Dr. Mordred, a pathologist and botanist. Dr. Felicia Fairweather, his female rival in the town. A lambent moon grows out of a purple crest, and, truthfully told, it holds our awe in, for most certainly this disk was pitted, rough, slightly deranged, and looked for all the world like a bottle top stuck onto the sky. Even at a distance of many thousand, in terms of miles, this square or moon disk glares at you. But down beneath in the pit, Mordred was hard at work in his garden. He is burying a puppet, a mannequin, or a ventriloquist's dummy, so to say. Do you remember those items or anti-mannequins which come alive at night, in accord with Thomas Ligotti's diction? You must recall also that Dr. Mordred, whether ancient or decrepit in hue, was not necessarily evil. No, sir, since his actions are governed by a different ethos, i.e. that of the timelessness of God's joy. By any warmth or procrastination, he rejected St. Augustine and the Pelagian infraction. These were ideas, sick, that muted the angelic or the demonic pathways to man. Indeed, the world of fate misunderstood Mordred in many respects. For no Manichean was he. He believed, au contraire, in the formulae of science, balance and order. That is, the sort of template which Fred Hoyle favoured. Don't those who disprivilege it call it scientism? Nonetheless, Mordred knew which path he had passed down towards Hades, and he understood that the gods favoured the brave, if not the justified. Had he been just in his deliberations? Yet, wherever the truth lay, he knew something about his naming, since, in related bouts of yore, Mordred had been a minor player at the Round Table. He happened to be a male witch or warlock, i.e. a practitioner of magic, who was married to Morgan Le Fay, the Celtic Medusa. By any token, he hurried forward in order to light up his awakening, even though Mallory's Morte d'Arthur refuses an easy mention of him. All he really did that is malevolent, therefore, was to oppose Arthur's will at the Round Table. Part the second. Now then, the moon's refulgent glow set off the garden with a silvern frit as Mordred continued to dig. His spade entered the soft loam or dewed grass, and his leather boots momentarily rested on its crossbar. What do you think? It is difficult to realize or sum it up, properly speaking. In any event, the soil was soon upturned, and varied puppets were then placed beneath the ground, or its surface's plenitude. Give it away, since Mordred's digging began apace. If only to treat the grass more leniently this time, he dug into verdant soma, if only to relieve the tension in himself. Up ahead, and by way of some sort of transference, the wind melded into the greenery without the house, and Mordred turned to look at the sun. What we might call, by heaven's gate, the empire of the sun. What was happening here, in all reality? Especially when we remember that Mordred is a magician, albeit a secular one, and even a native of Toadland. Could this be artificiality, or maybe the transference of one mind to another's ken? Mordred dreamed deeply of his betterment, and he even acknowledged the superficiality of the earth, that is, its Chthonian mantle. Do you wish to seize such a trajectory? And if so, are we not there also with Mordred? He signals the renewal of a heart tremor, if not one gust afore the fates. Maybe such a lifetime can never really be thought of. Gradually and over time, these vaudeville outlets, puppets, mannequins and nerds, all disappear. They go down into the oblivion of nothingness. Why should Mordred care, since he is at peace with the high gods, themselves whose multiplicitous shadows which pass between dimensions? In such a scenario as this, one madcap follows another, somewhat unbelievably. Let's follow this integer and look out at the garden. It proves to be ripe, unplucked, forever unbidden, and rather worked over in terms of its soil. Furthermore, and as J.G. Ballard once declared, it took after what we might call an atrocity exhibition. Behind him lay the house, and it proved to be a grand vehicle made up of pavilions. These had small frontispieces which worked themselves up into larger cascades, each one bearing upon it dome's impress. Some of the structures were metallic, others softer and more refulgent. Yet Mordred paid no mind to the overarching beams, what with their filigree and ormolu strictures. They were empanelled together, one after another. Do you reckon upon this, my masters? A strange and lambent glow transfixes each casement, all of them seemingly mullioned. They're contained in thick and ovalesque glass. Moreover, the sky above was a deep turquoise, that is to say, one which finishes off the abandonment of its own story. Ivy, tangleweed, and various creepers all infested these apertures. Also, and as an aside, the entire garden was lit up with every species imaginable. It proved to be a botanist's delight, with shades of lilac, pink, lemon, yellow, scarlet, cerulean, and deep black, etc. Nor does Dr. Mordred identify himself with anything beyond this emerald patch, to be sure. Yet suddenly, and by a fleeting flash, we notice that Mordred isn't alone among the shrubbery. Or is he? For, way up above him, strange tendrils emerge in the night time, or just before dawn. They have bark-like trunks which were undulating and yet firm, as well as smaller flowers poking out amidships. Yet when one thinks of it, what draws the eye to their amplitude is the stamen. Note this was the masculine part of the plant's identity, and yet in fact it surfaced here as the requirement for a head. You see, these growths or genetically modified crops per se are alive, yet yearn and thrust forward with a mammalian intent. Let it be in that they configure, at least within their own photosynthesis, the crux of what has happened before. To what can we attribute this? Wait and see, but whatever else, we can say that these plant heads were divas, delinquents, supersensory clusters, if not cluster bombs, in the making. They had white to yellow heads, coal grey eyes, nostrils and long trailing mouths. For an instant, and only that, they threshed and flailed around Mordred, up in the sky afore disappearing. Who or what were they, me ducks? Well, I shall tell ye. They are Mordred's children. Part the 3rd. Withdraw Red. All of a sudden, a distant bell sounded in the house's gloom, or its hidden recesses. Mordred turned slowly and gazed back down the garden path, covered over, as it was, with nettles, undergrowth and creepers. To be sure, the dusk was setting as Mordred departed, and the sky above his skull seemed cerulean, or even darker than that, an ultramarine. Wasn't this, a very long time ago, the name of an autobiographical novel by Malcolm Lowry? Let's pay it no heed, since Mordred was an elderly gentleman, well over 60 years of age at any rate, and he wore funereal black, somewhat like an undertaker, much rather than a botanist. Also, he affected a watch chain, a dress shirt with cuffs, some tight-lined trousers of deep grey, and a darkish jacket of uncertain cut. His limbs were relatively small, yet perfectly formed, in relation to the rest of his body. Meanwhile, what attracted most observers to Mordred was the issue of the head, for, in concord with Descartes' principles, Mordred indicated a mind-body split, at least in terms of an anima, no matter how reversible. In short, his skull proved to be domed, pyramidal, and high-arched, whilst the pink flesh was relatively young or unlined in terms of its fresh complexion. Underneath the heavily seated brow, however, the features beetled, and, to a neutral observer, they were doubtless forbidding, trying, or mildly terrifying. Let us try to imagine a portrait of Mordred by de Kooning, for example. This proves to be a scattergun approach to the problem, yet nothing can really be done about it. particularly when one is assessing a dome, a rectilinear orb, the shape of an otis, together with a scientist's paws or mouth. Somewhat sullenly, Dr. Mordred tramped into his house by the back door. He swerved to avoid the conservatory as he did so. Fourth part. Meantime, there was a furtive rustling in the arbour or its fields, and something struggled underground. It gave itself the airs of a roving existence, do you see? Most especially, a rootedness swarmed to meet its fate. Fate and all. A fact which had little to do with Simon Wheel's concepts. By any token, Mordred's shape flitted like a ghoul or bat as he crossed over the gap betwixt garden and house. Or if you might prefer, this was the interface between a house and a greenhouse, as it were. Why did you foresee such a notion afore it occurred? Particularly if you are said to possess second sight, like the child in Stephen King's The Shining. Look again, slowly, oh so slowly. The door is opening to reveal Dr. Felicia Fairweather, his rival in the small town where they both lived. She happened to be a tall, raw-boned woman who had survived at least 60 summers. She carried a small black bag on which the letters MD had been stamped or marbled. She also wore a coif, a stole, a large black dress, top and coat, as well as a Pompidou hat, redolent of Louis XV's reign. All in all, a part of her rig was more suitable for Ascot than provincial doctoring. Mordred, by virtue of his turn, had put his fingers to his lips, mock apologetically. He looked slightly perplexed, but in no way frightened. His mole-like or crustaceous exterior is observed as the light plays up and down it. It casts one register of skin, then another, into some form of darkness. Everywhere, and in sundry nooks and places, plants burst forth in abundance. Truly, Mordred's entire life, or hearth, was a temple to the rites botanic. It registered one thing and then another, in all inevitable. Dr. Felicia Fairweather, what a marvellous surprise, yodeled the male doctor. He was lying, of course. Really, expostulated Fairweather, don't think that I've come unprepared. With this assertion, she began her rally. There was no question about that. She also prodded Mordred, metaphorically, with a black parasol or umbrella, which she carried with her. Yet, in all honesty, she didn't succeed in touching him at all. "What am I guilty of?" he inquired, with a meekness that's quite clearly put on. "Many things," interrupted his unannounced guest. "For one matter, above all, you've purloined mannequins or dolls from the Dolls' Hospital, as it used to be called in a southern English town. May one call it so by a hint of desperation? And as well as this, you've then buried them in your garden. For what insane or madcap purport, I know not. All I comprehend, Dr. Mordred, is that you are unfit to practice medicine. To which end, I have contacted the Ethics Committee of the BMA, the British Medical Association, in the hope of having you struck off." "Struck off?" Mordred repeated to himself in a metallic whisper, and the noise seemed to come from under his tongue. Did he render himself snake-like thereby? But Felicia Fairweather was merely warming to her theme. Sixth part. Mordred thought for a moment and then remained silent, as he saw the umbrella aimed at him, yet he soon shrugged it off. "Really, Miss Fairweather," he remarked jauntily, "you must be prepared to focus your talents elsewhere. I say again, for your interest, that I oppose female entry into the profession of medicine. And I still do." Nevertheless, Mordred's mind wandered in various madcap stages or intrigues, and he saw a personification of the plants under the ground. These were those carnivorous hybrids, a machine tool unknown to man, that he was developing beneath the loam. They were laid bare by the muppets he fed them, and they existed in some soft ground or lawn. Weren't they moist and succulent? Then again, he saw them as upright, steel dodgems or apprentices. For one gazed in an asylum out of a heavily mullioned window. Didn't he embody the catalepsy of a disused clown? Also, and as an outrider to the above, no one suspected the person next to him of having no features. Instead of this, he wore a balaclava, a mask within a mask, rather like a Clive Barker figure who was communing with himself. 7th part. Felicia Fairweather was not finished with her indictment, however, and she could also tune into one's dreams. To bring it to a point, she saw a moon, which was itself a rock in the heavens, holding up the sky or its cerulean afterglow. In her imagination, there were no plants, let alone a variant on John Wyndham's Triffids, in sight. What she observed instead is a motley collection of individuals, many of them suffering from acute mental distress. They were in the anxiety or distressed section of a psychiatric hospital, something which could well be described as a sanctuary. Woe and betide anyone who refuses this sanction, since a group of persons gestured around a pack of cards. Moreover, their gesticulations proved to be redundant under such a pellucid glow. In any event, Felicia recited her indictment, perhaps in a way that was reminiscent of Beckett. It proves to be an attempt to break the silence. Oh yes. Dr. Felicia Fairweather. I have warned you for months, Mordred, about your carryings on. Dr. Mordred. And what might this amount to, my dear? Felicia Fairweather. Please do not assume a patronizing tone. I beg you, Mordred, since such a conclusion or valency is not one that I'm prepared to tolerate. 8th part. Mordred listened to Dr. Felicia Fairweather, but he did so with only half an ear. His listening profile was disassociative, as we might say, but his verbal memory is stirred in an unashamed way. At the beginning, he noted that this matriarch had rapped on the doorframe, at once pushing, pulling, and even prodding with her umbrella. Note, it happened to be a feminine parasol dressed in black, as well as being compressible. Mordred let her talk. In truth, he didn't mind this farewell to arms, with or without Hemingway's diction. By and by, their positions altered, as he sought out a reclining posture. This was to be had at the heart of a chair-cum-sofa, the like of which resembled a stamen, or the budding interior of many plants. Isn't the stamen indicative of maleness, in botanic terms? By this little time, Dr. Felicia Fairweather was well into her stride, and she laid out a balance sheet. It consisted, for the most part, of various accusations against Mordred. To cut to the quick, she accused him of falsifying medical certificates, so that he could bury a large number of toys in the garden. His thought processes were obscure, she confessed as much, but she wasn't going to let the matter rest. Mordred looked a tad jaded or tired, yet he wasn't in the least bit weighed down by this onslaught. He sat there, pricking up his ears and nodding the occasional assent. One thing to notice is that the pair are completely assailed on every side by plants. They were in a teeming living room indeed. 9th part. The physical situation of our two combatants has now turned around, and Mordred is on the left whilst Fairweather points an accusing finger from the right. Finally, we see Mordred, alone and indefatigable, and sat on what looks like an enormous pod or ripening jug. He extends his hand delicately so as to smell a rare bloom or its perfume, and as he does so, one becomes aware of organicism. of a monist doctrine or the interconnectedness of all things. Note, one also spies a parallel involving a gigantic spider in Dennis Wheatley's The Haunting of Toby Jug. 10th part. After a while, Dr. Mordred began to have his say, albeit in a less hectoring fashion. He started in a low key and with a pleasant bedside manner, as you say, yet his voice became more strident and assertive as he continued. Let's examine the facts now, since Mordred gradually warms to his theme. He remembered picking up stray ideas, you see, on a grand tour to Europe. Given his great age, this must have happened a long time ago. The sky was a deep orange that mulated to purple in his recollection of it, and he remembered some decisive chess matches with Aleister Crowley, then in his pomp of Edwardian chaos. By any stint, he, Mordred, moved in diverse circles in order to mesmerize and bewitch. Any audience available can take it or leave it. He remembered, rather vaguely, that Crowley and Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, had practiced magic, even chemistry, in California together years ago. This had set Mordred off on his lonely trail, or catwalk, do you see? Quoth the middle-aged doctor and botanist began to seek out new and unheralded vistas, all of which had to do with the nutrition ducts of the vegetable kingdom, to seek out and classify those sources of food for plants. This had become his life's ambition, until, from a key provided by genetically modified crops, he had learned how to resynthesize Venus flytraps. They are plants which, if you recall, are part animal, being carnivorous, and part plant per se. It was only then that his companion, Dr. Felicia Fairweather, began to intuit what had been going on. You see, my dear, Dr. Mordred announced rather grandly, my botanical marvels feed on human flesh. As he said this, he drew a sword stick out and slipped the blade from its scabbard. Oh my God, he's insane, murmured Felicia to herself, as her bonnet fell from the back of her head. What am I to do, she thought. 11th part. The scene changes aloft or apace, much like the two swivelling chariots in Shakespeare's Richard III. Up until now, in their ready discourse, Mordred and Fairweather circled each other. They were admittedly wary, but that was all. Now, however, we shift gears completely, as we spy on Mordred's manse from without, and it appears to be a subdued husk, caught in poster paint and existing under a turquoise sky, occasionally due to thunderous conditions and much iron in the ground. Spain apes its climate. The mansion also besports, amid its towers and extensions, the schemata of David Hockney in terms of raw paint. Likewise, in the scenario where Mordred talks about food, i.e. mock human fare, and then draws a sword, why, Felicia moves away from him. She inadvertently starts to run into the garden via a side door. Yet, in all honesty, what concerns us here is a type of contagion, if not a colour scheme, that's primary in its impulses. Without realising it, in her fright, Dr. Felicia Fairweather has gambled straight into Mordred's garden by mistake. 12th part. For, by dint of any purpose, Fairweather had lost her directional sense and ran into the underbrush, toad court. A streak of azure or cerulean then came down and almost clove her in two, metaphorically. A pink wall containing some serrated bricks also held her in its nimble vein, and likewise one is also free to see various garden implements, such as an old-fashioned watering can about the place, to reveal, all in all, a side door opened slowly, rather like the vampire scene in F.W. Murnau's film Nosferatu in 1926. Dr. Mordred stood in the moonlight, and he looked very dapper in his Edwardian Sunday best, while he held aloft a glowing orb. It soon turned out to be a lantern of yesteryear, that is, down to its very fixtures and fittings. 13th part. By some sort of mistake, Felicia had emerged into the outer garden, itself beyond an arbour filled with every green assortment. It was unbelievable in its way, and yet virtually all the plants on earth, in one form or another, were crammed into this space. Also, the green fingers of Mordred have waxed livid and procreative. To be able to create such an abundance, at one level, it was almost magical. Mordred appeared now, in a magentaed haze, and he said in a metallic whisper, "It's almost midnight, my dear. It's an auspicious moment, because they blossom in the full moon or under its lambent beam. These are my very children, in truth." 14th part. She attempted to raise for a moment or two, and yet, all of a sudden, or by a craven motion, she found herself all at sea. The moon glinted over Mordred's battlements, but this had little to do with her present calamity, for bindweed or creepers, of a sullen sort, rise up in order to enclose her, and this constriction, of whatever kind, prevented her from moving or making her escape. In this sense, she resembled a girl in a magician's act at the circus, and to be sure, Mordred was the male witch, warlock or mage. She then fainted, quite away, with a resultant moan. "Oh," she let out, all of a moment, and quite possibly in the direst panic. Nonetheless, she did gain a glance or two of Mordred's Venus flytraps. So intent was he on his prey, Felicia, that the good doctor paid scant attention to them. Lower and lower they bobbed in the moonlight, at once lit up, frugal, tomato-laden Fret, White-Girt, and Vulcan. They were the result of some fungus progeny, to be sure. Immediately they grabbed hold of Mordred, who screamed hideously as he realized his mistake, and the torch, brazier, or lamp fell from his grasp, so as to cascade into an inferno beneath his feet. Soon the heat from the burning garden revived Felicia Fairweather, and she managed, in a confused state, to make her way out into the lane which ran circumadjacent to the Botanic ruin within. After the fire, and amid the legal delay which followed, Dr. Felicia Fairweather purchased Mordred's estate, and most of the latter's patients moved over to her practice. She hired a locum, admittedly, but otherwise bore the workload without complaint. More importantly, she had the garden cemented over, and she never returned to it. The memories involved were too painful, you see. In such a particular, one reconnects with a work of literature, like Ian McEwan's The Cement Garden. By all accounts, yet in all truth, cement cracks and breaks, particularly if pressure is being applied from below. And on the odd, moonlit evening, some very strange weeds come up, faintly bestir themselves, and then sway under a dismal shade. So in turn, given what has already happened, this may or may not be the end. Well, there you have it, folks. Venus Flytrap by Bowden. Pretty evocatively rendered, I think you'll agree. And quite a fun little story. And poor old Dr. Mordred, taken out by, what should we say, hoist by his own petard, eh? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you enjoyed these two readings today. If you did, please hit like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Yeah, I'll see you next week with another video.